How do social dynamics within the classroom influence pupils' learning and social development? Are some students more at risk of discrimination than others? In this episode, educational scientist Professor Jeanine Grütter explains the factors driving bullying and the potential remedies to create better school environments. Hi, and welcome to In the Swarm, the podcast where we dive into the mind behind the hives. And today we have a very special guest. Please, a very warm welcome to Professor Jeanine Grütter.
Thank you, Nak. It's very kind that you invited me, and I'm happy to be here.
So, would you mind please telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, how you get into research, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I'm a professor of education and developmental psychology, and I study children's social and moral development, mostly with regards to fairness. So what is fair for them? Is it okay if some people have more of resources and opportunities than others? Is it okay if some children are not treated in the same way as others? When and do children understand it? And how can we promote this so that we can promote also the acceptance of everyone in schools? And I develop educational programs to help schools so they can become more inclusive and promote social skills of children.
So your research is actually very applied, it seems. Do you first start with an idea to do research and then you get into contact, I don't know, with schools, or do they contact you first because they know who you are and what you've done? How has it been for you, like, with this sort of thing?
Yeah, nowadays it's both. I also recently joined an initiative where we evaluate programs in developing countries that have like learning applications for children, and we counsel them. But in the earlier days, I was I worked as a school psychologist.
Oh, so you work in the school?
No, in a counseling service for children and adolescents and families, and I did also counseling sessions. Yeah, and I was wondering whether I should become a therapist. But then I was very fascinated by the idea of having evidence to really support which things could be done better, what are interventions also that work to help children and adolescents. And yeah, that's why I then decided to do a doctorate, a PhD.
Okay, so this was your first kind of foray into really science, so to speak. Like, what was your master's, before you got into your PhD?
Besides studying, I always worked like as a teacher for autistic children.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to know how can we include them in regular schools, because in the school I worked, it was very separated.
Yes.
And that's why for my master thesis, I then wanted to better understand whether inclusive schooling works.
So in a way, an ideal classroom for you would have neurodivergent children mixed in along with quote unquote non-neurodivergent children.
So I think that schools would benefit if like everyone has a place there. It's a human right. It's in various charters, human rights charters, children's charters. And there are countries around the world that are trying this. There are conventions for schools, conferences where they come together, think about how it could work well. But then oftentimes there are children that need a lot of resources, and then the schools don't want to have them anymore in their curriculum. And that's then not really a success story, and that's what we hear all the time in the newspapers, but no one really talks about schools that just work well. And so I wanted to see whether there is evidence for if it really works or doesn't work. And then the more important question for me is, when does it work? And why does it work? And what can we do better to really help the children develop well?
So do you think there are solutions out there? Do you think that we've found like sufficient lead into like the ultimate solution? Or do you think it's going to be different for everyone, different cultures? Because your background is also that you've traveled to so many different countries and you've experienced so many different types of cultures and schoolings. And I'm sure that's also like deepened your kind of outlook into children and schooling system and how different all these different factors come together.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a recipe that
of
is
course.
like
Yeah.
working for everyone in the same way, but yeah, different cultures have like different groups that have been disadvantaged because of historical causes, because of very large inequalities that really also pertain their disadvantaged status. And so depending on the country that we study, we need to better understand really what do people perceive, what are like the groups that need support. And then we can see whether like schools really mix also these children, because I mean, if we look at Nepal, where I did a lot of research, we had the caste system, and that distinguished based on your last name, who you could marry, what kind of jobs you could get. And so the poorest now in the society in Nepal are people from the lowest caste, and it's very deeply entrenched still in the mindset, even though the caste system was banned in the 60s. So yeah, there we don't find many schools where there are a lot of children from lower castes still nowadays. And the schools that do mix them often have scholarships for people from disadvantaged families. And these scholarships are only helpful if there are enough students with a disadvantaged backgrounds. That's something that we found with our work and also communicated with politicians, with people from the UNESCO. And yeah, that's like an example. If we look at Switzerland and Germany, where I do a lot of work, we have a lot of people with different abilities, children with disabilities. We have also children from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. And oftentimes teachers wonder how they should deal with all this diversity. And there it's really about having enough resources. For example, 2 teachers would be much better than 1. They need a lot of training. They need really school structures that support them. They need people that also support the families to, in the end, help the kids learn.
So you just mentioned a very, very interesting thing. You have told me in secret that you never intended to be a professor. So how was it that you actually landed yourself this position?
It's just I followed my opportunities and interests. I mean, when I was a kid, I wanted to help animals and become a veterinarian. Then later I wanted to study medicine, but it wasn't possible because money-wise. So I did psychology, and I found it very fascinating to understand like people's behaviors and also how they work in groups mainly. As I told you, I've worked during the studies as a teacher for children with autism, then as a school psychologist. And there were like so many cases where I thought like, okay, there must be something wrong with the system behind this. There are so many children, adolescents that suffer from like mental issues. So many schools that don't want to educate children or adolescents anymore because it's like too difficult. Sometimes also understandable that they were at the limits of their resources. I'm not judging anyone, but I wanted to understand better the system and how we can support it. That's why I did my PhD, and there was the great opportunity to go to Toronto. That was something that really interested me. And then my plan was to go to the UN. Yeah, to help also better understand what kind of education systems work around the world. But at the same time, I got like my scholarship to go to Nepal and study this question on my own terms.
So you basically, the moral of the story is follow your passions, follow what interests you. At some point, you may end up there just because the opportunities allow you.
Yeah, and I enjoyed every day in Nepal. I mean, if there weren't any like natural catastrophes or any political issues, but yeah, because it was just very inspiring to be there. Then I went to the US. It was also another interesting context. But I didn't know whether I would still have a contract 1 year later. And I went home to visit my family. A job opportunity came up at the University of Zurich. So I took it. And then again, I was considering doing more evaluation, applied work. Another opportunity also came up. And then at the same time, there was this idea suddenly to become a professor because I found out that, you can be much more independent in your research. That became very clear, but very late. And then, it was really a good opportunity. And I mean, I always worked hard in research, but I was just also very interested and fascinated by the topics that I had and wonderful people I met all around the world. So I would say that this is a good advice to just follow your opportunities that really interest you and not ask this question too much about career planning and just go where you find is your inspiration.
So tell us more about how you study these classroom dynamics and, equality within the classroom and how the children respond to each other.
Yeah, we have different projects that we look at. Some are more related to the classroom, some more really about the competencies that children have. We have a cluster project that focuses on better understanding the dynamics in education, social dynamics. So how come that a child is very popular and on the other hand some children don't have friends, and how come that for example children with a foreign background are at a higher risk of being excluded from their peers at school. We want to really better understand this. So we study children and adolescents' competencies to deal with such difficult situations for them, because when we look at this from a moral perspective, they have a very strong desire to be fair and just, but sometimes it's not so easy for them because they also have to consider what their own plan is, how they can act autonomously, for example, and how mostly they can be a member of a really cool peer group. And so there are lots of conflicts sometimes in their reasoning that they're not aware of. And based on the need that's most salient to them or most important, they act.
Yeah.
That's what we want to better understand. So, and something that also feeds into this is prejudice, for example. Okay, this is a child that just came from Ukraine, for example, and doesn't speak German. If we include him or her in the group, then it might be that we don't get a good grade because this person doesn't speak German yet. And that are things that children say sometimes. So they have these biases, or a larger bias would be, this person is lazy because she's not from the same background. And this can also feed into that. So we also want to better understand not only moral reasoning, but also how do these group biases emerge in children and adolescents. When are they very prominent, and what can teachers do to talk about this with children and adolescents, because it's very important to talk about it, not only to just promote social competencies. I mean, empathy is very, very important. If we talk about it, we might be able to investigate where they come from. And that's our approach for school classes. And here it's also interesting because a lot of the programs that we know focus on young children, because they think, the biases are not yet well developed, so we can do a lot. But they forget that it's not just a linear trend.
Exactly.
So we have adolescents, for example, that are, again, that can have no biases as children. But then when they grow older, suddenly they become aware I'm different from others, and they really want to belong. So they might be mean in some situations.
Any first results, any outcomes that you can share with us currently?
Not yet. We are looking at it. We just had 200 children that came to our lab in the last 2 months, and we tested them in groups of 6.
Okay.
We had 4 synchronized cameras to look at their behavior during different group tasks, where, for example, they had to discuss about a story where a child was excluded, or they had to themselves solve some bystander situations where someone wasn't treated very fairly. They had to do also fairness games. Yeah, and it's very interesting because we looked at those behaviors and at the same time looked at the heart rate variability. They were wearing smartwatches and belts. And from this data, we can see that in some very pilot data, for example, children who are friends are more synchronized. Yeah, that's what we investigate. Are these patterns that we see in children in groups, can we look at this in an objectable way?
So you look at heart rate synchronization using heart rate variability data. And do you also look at posture synchronization and things like that? So see if they mimic or they just synchronize with each other, how they act with their bodies. And
then we can see whether this aligns with their perception of the situation. So how they felt during the group task, whether they think that they are a member
of the group.
Yeah, whether they were stressed, where they experienced it. So that's going to be very interesting. So, for example, like a very simple idea would be if we can have like a lot of mutual smiling during the discussion. There should be also more physiological synchronization in the heart rate variability, and people would have a more positive experience of this group and experience this also as more like a cohesive group.
So Jeanine just mentioned that there could be synchrony in physiology. What does this mean and how can this be investigated?
Yeah, so physiology things are more like, let's say, heart rate or skin conductance and all these things. And there's actually studies that tried to look for this. So an example is this paper that used the speed dating context, where they put a male and a female across of each other trying to basically know each other.
Okay, but how can we know that they are synchronized?
Yeah, so in this experimental setup, they tried to measure everything. So things like their heart rate, their skin conductance, their gaze, and also their behaviors, like smiling or laughter. And they measured all of this for all the participants during this speed dating activity. And basically, they found all these factors are actually synchronized between pairs. So for a given pair, they synchronize in all these things.
Oh, that's quite cool. But how is this linked to attraction, which is potentially one of the outcomes of speed dating?
Yeah, so this study actually found two main results. So the first thing is actually males are in general more likely to be more attracted to their partner, which is super interesting. The second one is actually the heart rate and skin conductance actually correlates with attraction. So the more attracted you are, the more synchronized you are in your heart rate and skin conductance.
Okay, so it seems like to be on the same wavelengths is inscribed also in our physiology.
Exactly. So the phrase "the same wavelength" might actually be literal. Like if a pair is synchronized in attracted to each other, they're actually synchronized in heart rate.
Oh, that's quite cool. And I hope to see if it's also applying to school dynamics. For the moment, let's go back to Jeanine and Nak.
Do you have children coming in who are already part of a group, or do you just mix them up and see if they become part of the group or not?
That would also have been interesting, but those are school classes that we already collected data 2 months before they first came to the lab. So we can also see whether there are some developmental things that predict how they then behave in the lab during the experiment. We knew quite well what would be the friendships in a classroom, whether there are children that experience bullying, whether there are children that feel isolated. And we were very, very careful to not put together children that don't get along very well, so that no one was at the risk of being treated very badly.
It's so interesting. Do you ever get a chance to really interview them afterwards? Like, oh, by the way, you did this.
Yeah, and I mean, again, we have this can take this model where you have different needs and considerations. Mm-hmm. And in the case where you can act out a situation that you would maybe otherwise not do, your personal needs are more important than the treatment of your peers that are there. It's not a real situation, but it's stressful for the children. We can measure this.
Yeah.
And so in this case, the needs would go first. I mean, it wasn't all the children, but it was some children where we were surprised. And then, we would love to see how this applies back to their real life, but we know really who are also bullies in classrooms, who are the popular kid. And a next step of our cluster project would also be to go to classrooms and have recordings of real life situations.
That's really, really so cool. Do you have any plans to involve the teachers or to collect data on the teacher themselves?
Yeah, we also have projects with younger kids, but for really this educational project that we have, so we in another research or previous research, we developed our own intervention for schools that they can use to promote acceptance of the children. And there we work a lot with the teachers because we believe that it's like key. Teacher is like a role model for others on how to treat each other. Teachers can also communicate like a social value of their students. For example, if they always praise someone, this child, and that research shows it, is more popular later on. And there is unfortunately also the opposite. So if someone gets scolded all the time, this child is more on the at a risk to be unpopular later on. And the teachers, they really need to be aware on how they deal with children. Also, if they show difficult behaviors. For adolescents, it's even worse because it could be that, for them it's very important that they have integrity, that they are protected in the way, like in their self-esteem, they get accepted the way they are. And if then they feel shame because of the teacher in certain situations, it can be very damaging also, not only to the student's self-concept, but also to the reputation that they have. So, we really work a lot with teachers. We do assessments of each classroom to see what is like the social dynamic going on there. Then we do a counseling of the teacher. If they are involved in our intervention, they then practice this for 6 weeks with the students. Then the hope is that some things that they really like in our intervention, they would continue. For example, like these role plays or discussions about, like structured discussions about biases, or even small things like praising each other, that they might not be aware of, or having a secret buddy that you have to observe, like a classmate that you don't know well, and you discover new things.
Oh, wow.
We found out that there can be a lot of emerging friendships. So there are actually a lot of strategies for teachers to promote positive opportunities for contacts with the student. They can't force them to be friends if they don't want to, but they can promote like these positive opportunities. And through this, the dynamics change a lot. And that's what our project also shows, the friendship program, that mostly the social climate gets better of the class. Children are more accepted. They feel like less bullied. We often also see that after the 6 weeks, they are very motivated to keep on with it. But there are always some issues remaining.
So now I would like to lead us more a little bit into the realm of, is this a good thing to do in the classroom? The research that you've, conducted all of these years has said that, yes, actually, it's a very, very good and beneficial thing to have more diversity, like just expose children to, all of these senses of fairness and less discrimination. But how does that look like, really?
Well, the children can benefit a lot if they think that it's normal to be different, right? So if there are a lot of kids that have never seen a person with disability.
Yes.
Because it's not normal for them, they don't go to the same school, right? Yeah. And then they're adults and they see a person and they don't know how to interact.
Yeah.
And if we have from early on, this was an example with disability, but it could be for all like different types of diversity that we have. If this is just something normal, because it's there and positive experiences are possible, then children can learn a lot of tolerance. And I think that a lot of biases we would not have if those, positive contacts would be like the standard. But then at school, if we really want to have a school that every child can learn and also realize their capacities, I think we would have to rethink the way of schooling. I think that we can achieve it if we have the next generation to be more tolerant. There might be more chances that they are willing to change something in the system.
Yeah,
right?
I think you have a really good point. So now that we're wrapping up after this whole journey of very exciting scientific data and the classroom and everything, what excites you the most about science? What do you find the most rewarding, like, as a researcher?
Most rewarding thing is that I can collaborate with really smart and very nice people that inspire me also with their ideas. And I think it's really cool that we have here in Constance also this cluster where we can do interdisciplinary work and learn from each other. And we have this like a lot of support to do this research. Besides this, obviously that I can research or investigate any topic that I find is worth it, that I find interesting, fascinating. I can think about how to measure and understand something, come up, write a grant proposal. If I am lucky and it's a good one, then it gets funded. And then I can work with my team, what I also really enjoy, because I have a really fascinating team with super cool people, very talented young scholars. And I think it's nice that I can mentor them and also, help them explore what they want to do, where they want to get to. This is very nice. I also really enjoy that we can do the applied work in schools and work with children, adolescents, and also families and teachers, and that we can, come up with programs and ideas that are meaningful, that they think are supportive. And we have also the evidence that's even nicer, right? So we could take it a bit higher and also try to implement it on a larger scale. So we have like this backup from science, which is very cool.
I feel like I could ask you about all sorts of things and just ask you about all the interventions and all the data, all the findings forever. But thank you so, so much for your time today. I have learned a lot, and I'm really happy that there's, your whole team, and I'm sure your whole network of people devoted to learning and studying the children and the dynamics and how do we teach ourselves and how do we teach, the next generations to become more tolerant, to accept more, to understand more, to look more, and to listen and understand that differences are not bad and that it's fascinating and it's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nak. It was very nice to be here, and thanks for your wonderful wrap up and take home message. I don't have to say anything more.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.